The metal was cold. It was the first and final truth of his world. A cold that seeped through matted, filthy fur, down to the bone, down to a heart that had all but forgotten the rhythm of a steady beat. The darkness was absolute, thick as crude oil, and it smelled the same, a mixture of rust, old machine grease, and a dampness that never left. Sometimes, a low uterine rumble would penetrate the steel-hulled distant engines or the ocean battering the ship's side. He didn't know the difference. Sound was just sound. His one remaining ear, tattered and torn, twitched, trying to catch anything besides the endless drone. But the hold was dead. It was a tomb, floating on water. Hunger had long ceased to be a sharp pang, morphing into a dull, aching void within him. Water? Sometimes a drop of condensation would fall from the wall, and he would lie motionless for hours, hoping it would land close enough for his tongue to reach. He didn't remember how he got here. Memory was a luxury his tormented brain could no longer afford. There were only fragments of sensation, rough hands, a kick, the clang of a closing door, and then this eternal night. He was just cargo, forgotten cargo in hold number 4. Up above, on a deck flooded with the blinding light of the port, Arthur Finch snapped the clasp on his tablet. The air smelled of salt, diesel fuel, and something else, the scent of hustle. Arthur hated that scent. For him, the world was divided into 2 categories, order and chaos. His job was to turn the latter into the former. Port Authority Sanitation Inspector. It sounded impressive, but in reality it meant waging war on rats, checking for insects, and signing countless certificates of fumigation. The vessel, the North Star, had arrived from Panama. A long voyage. The holds were empty, ready for a new load, but protocol was protocol. Arthur pulled on his latex gloves with a familiar snap and switched on his powerful flashlight. Its beam was a surgical scalpel, slicing open the dark corners of this iron giant. Hold number 4, he muttered to himself, checking the schematic. He descended the creaking metal gangway. Down below, he was met by the silence he knew so well. The silence of emptiness. His footsteps echoed off the steel walls, the sound, his only companion in places like this. He methodically swept the beam along the perimeter, seams, corners, ventilation grates. All clear. Another 15 minutes, and he would sign off, authorizing the treatment. In the far corner, the old dog flinched. Light. He hadn't seen light in an eternity. This wasn't the sun, that warm, almost forgotten thing. This was a sharp, merciless beam that lanced his atrophied pupils. Pain. Light was pain. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his head into the cold floor. After the light came a sound. Crisp, measured footsteps. Not the shuffling of sailors, not the bustle of longshoremen. These steps were different. They had purpose, danger. The instinct he thought had died along with hope flickered to life for a second. He tried to shrink further, to become part of the shadow, part of the rust, to disappear. His body wouldn't obey. He didn't even have the strength to whimper. All that escaped his throat was a quiet, barely audible rasp. Dry as dust, Arthur Finch froze. He had heard it. It wasn't the squeak of a rat or the groan of metal. It was something alive. Something that, under no circumstances, should have been here, in a sealed and empty hold. His finger froze over the radio button. The protocol was crystal clear. Immediately report the unauthorized biological entity to dispatch. This was his job, his world of order. But he didn't press the button. Instead, he slowly moved the flashlight beam toward the sound. At first, it caught only a dark stain against the wall. Arthur took a step, then another, and then he saw it. It wasn't just a dog. It was a skeleton draped in matted fur. Its ribs protruded so sharply they looked as if they might tear through the skin, and a single ear, which twitched in his direction. The other was just a ragged scar. The flashlight held steady, pinning the wretched creature in its light. The dog opened its eyes. There was no aggression in them, no fear. There was nothing at all. Only the dull reflection of the flashlight beam. a reflection of all the darkness in which it had spent the last weeks. Or months? He didn't know. Arthur stood in the absolute silence of the vast metal hall. The sound of his own breathing was deafening. His job was to find and eliminate. His duty was to report. But he looked into those empty eyes and understood that if he pressed the radio button now, he would be signing a death warrant. For the world of order, it would be just another problem eliminated. Another check mark on a form, and for this dog it would be the end. His hand, sheathed in its sterile glove, slowly lowered from the radio. He stood motionless, staring at the trembling bundle of life in the midst of all this dead steel. And for the first time in many years, Arthur Finch didn't know what to do next. A minute stretched into an eternity. The hold seemed to hold its breath along with Arthur. In that deafening silence, only three things existed: his orders, his conscience, and the faint, shallow breathing at his feet. Protocol wasn't just a word on paper. It was the framework of his life, his philosophy. Order, predictability, control. He brought peace to the chaotic world of the port. And this dog was the embodiment of chaos. Unaccounted for, sick, dying. A violation? He pictured the radio call. Dispatch. This is Inspector Finch. I found a biological entity in hold 4, canine, I believe. Condition is critical. The response would be just as lifeless and clear. Acknowledged, Finch. Remain on site. An animal control unit will be there in 10. Do not make contact. Animal control. 2 guys with a tranquilizer gun and a plastic bag. Disposal. That was the correct word from the protocol. Cold, sterile, final. His flashlight beam wavered. He lowered it to the dog's muzzle, and he saw a detail he'd missed at first. Around its nose and mouth, the fur was wet. Not from condensation, from tears. Or was it just the moisture from its faint breath? Arthur didn't know. But in that moment, the dog ceased to be a biological entity. It became someone who had been crying in the dark. Damn it, Arthur breathed out. The word was swallowed by the cavernous space. He switched the radio off. Not just taking his finger off the button, but flipping the power switch, severing the connection to his world of order. This was his Rubicon. The click of a switch. He took a step forward. The dog shuddered, a pathetic, panicked spasm. A hoarse cough rattled in its throat. Easy, easy now, boy. Arthur's voice was uncharacteristically rough. He rarely used it for more than short, official phrases. He knelt on one knee, the fabric of his old work uniform straining and creaking. Slowly, like a bomb disposal expert cutting a wire, he peeled the latex glove from his right hand. His bare skin felt the cold, damp air of the hold. He extended his hand, palm up. He stopped it, a foot from the dog's muzzle. He just waited. He didn't know what for. Maybe for the dog to bite. Maybe for it to die right there. The dog didn't move, only its single ear twitched, analyzing the new sound, a quiet, soothing voice. Its nose quivered, trying to catch a scent. The scent of a human without aggression. A scent it no longer remembered. Another minute passed. Then, impossibly slowly, the dog turned its head just a fraction. Its nose touched the tips of Arthur's fingers. The dog's skin was ice cold, dry and cold like old parchment. The touch was like a jolt, not of electricity, but of emotion. In that instant, Arthur Finch, Port Authority Inspector, ceased to be an inspector. He was just a man who had found another living soul in the darkness. "That's it, that's a good boy," he whispered. Now he had to act, and act fast. The fumigation team could arrive at any moment to begin their prep. He had maybe half an hour. He quickly scanned his surroundings. A plan, born of desperation and professional knowledge, began to form. He knew this ship. He knew where the security camera's blind spots were. He knew the service corridors the crew rarely used. The main gangway was out of the question. Always people there. But there was a maintenance exit on the lower deck, almost at the waterline. From there, a narrow walkway led to a staff-only service elevator. It was his only chance. Carefully, millimeter by millimeter, Arthur slid his other hand under the dog's chest. It weighed almost nothing, bones and a will to live. That's all that was left. The dog didn't resist. It had no strength to. When Arthur lifted it, its head lolled limply. "Hang on, boy. Just hang on a little longer," Arthur muttered, unzipping his heavy work jacket. He wrapped the dog in it like a cocoon. The warmth of his own body had to do something to warm this frozen creature. Now, in his arms, he just held a bundle of dark fabric, not too suspicious if he moved with confidence. He switched his flashlight back on, but now its beam wasn't searching for violations. It was searching for a path to salvation. The ladder. The creak of the rungs under his boots seemed deafening. Inside the jacket, he felt a faint tremor. The dog was alive. The corridor, long, narrow, with dim lamps overhead. Doors to machine rooms on either side. The humming grew louder. Arthur walked quickly, but didn't run. A running man attracts attention. A calm man, carrying his jacket, is just doing his job. He repeated it to himself like a mantra. There was the elevator. He pressed the button. The wait was torture. Every second was a risk that someone from the crew would appear around the corner. The doors hissed open. Empty. He stepped inside. The button for the P2 parking level. His car was there. The elevator crept upwards with agonizing slowness. Arthur looked down at the bundle against his chest. From the folds of the jacket, two eyes stared up at him. There was something in them now. Not hope, not yet, but not emptiness either. There was curiosity, and an infinite, all-consuming exhaustion. The doors opened onto the nearly deserted staff parking lot. His old Ford was in the far corner, under a dim lamp. 50 more steps. 50 steps to safety. The air outside was fresh, salty. After the stale stench of the hold, it was intoxicating. He reached the car, fumbling in his pocket for the keys. Finally, the click of the lock. He opened the passenger door and gently, as if carrying a priceless relic, placed the bundle on the seat. He unwrapped the jacket. The dog lay still, breathing heavily. It blinked in the light of the car's interior lamp. Arthur shut the door, walked around, got into the driver's seat, and closed his own door. Silence. Here, in the small, contained world of his car, the sounds of the port receded. All that remained was the shallow breathing of the creature on the passenger seat and the deafening thud of his own heart. He'd done it. He'd gotten it out. He'd broken every rule, risked his job, his reputation, his entire orderly world. He sat, staring ahead at the concrete wall of the parking garage. His hands on the steering wheel were trembling. Now what, Finch? What in the hell do you do now? The question, now what, hung in the silence of the car, heavy and relentless. Arthur Finch sat gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only anchor in a storm of his own making. His world, a world of clean lines, instructions, and predictable outcomes, had just collapsed. He looked at the creature lying on the passenger seat. It wasn't just a dog, it was evidence. Evidence of his crime against protocol, against his entire life. He began calculating the consequences with a cold, familiar methodicalness, but a fire of panic was burning inside him. Tomorrow morning, someone would notice he hadn't filed his report on the North Star. The calls would start. He would have to lie. A lie. Arthur Finch didn't lie. He filed reports. His word was as reliable as the steel of the ships he inspected. And now? Now he was a criminal, harboring contraband. Living, breathing, dying contraband. He glanced at the dog. It was trembling faintly. Its breathing was a barely perceptible rise and fall of ribs beneath the filthy fur. Arthur suddenly realized a terrible, simple truth. He might have gotten the dog out of the hold, but the hold was still inside the dog. The cold, the starvation, the despair. They hadn't gone anywhere. They were killing it from the inside, right here on the velour seat of his Ford. Water. The thought was a flash of lightning. He frantically scanned the car. In the cup holder was a half-empty bottle of mineral water. He unscrewed the cap, poured a little into his palm. The water was lukewarm, stale. He carefully brought his hand to the dog's muzzle. The dog didn't react. Its eyes were half closed. Arthur dipped a finger in the water and gently wiped it across the animal's dry, cracked lips. And then a miracle happened. A pink, rough tongue emerged weakly and touched his finger. Once, twice. It was the most delicate, most desperate movement Arthur had ever witnessed. The dog didn't just need water. It needed help, professional help, immediately. That thought pushed all others aside. The fear for his job, for his reputation, it all faded into the background. In front of him was a task, a specific, measurable task, demanding an immediate solution. And that brought Arthur Finch back to solid ground. He pulled out his phone. His trembling fingers struggled to type into the search bar, 24-hour veterinary clinic. For the dog, the world had become a kaleidoscope. After the eternal darkness, the headlights of oncoming cars, the street lamps, the neon signs, it all blurred into one swimming, hazy smear. He was lying on something soft, and this soft thing was vibrating, lulling him. The scent of the human, not the terrifying one from before, but this new one, smelling of soap and anxiety, was close. He didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time in a very long time, the cold was receding. Its icy grip was loosening. Arthur drove, his eyes fixed on the GPS. The Hope Animal Clinic was 15 minutes away. Hope. What an irony. He sped, breaking the speed limit, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care about the traffic cameras. Every tremor, from the dog on the seat beside him, was a dull blow to his own chest. He spoke to him, not knowing if the dog could hear or understand. Just hang on, we're almost there. You hear me? We're almost there, boy. He parked in front of the brightly lit entrance. Once again, he wrapped the dog in his jacket, which now smelled not only of him, but of sickness, rust, and the sea. He carried him out of the car. The bundle in his arms felt terrifyingly light. The clinic door opened with a soft chime. Inside, it was bright, sterile, and smelled of medicine. A young woman in blue scrubs sat behind the reception desk. She looked up, her eyes tired. "Hello, how can I?" Oh my God. She didn't see a man with a jacket, but what was in the jacket? Her professionalism took over. She pressed a button on the intercom. "Dr. Evans, I need you in reception, now." Arthur placed the dog on a metal examination table. Under the bright lights, its condition looked even more horrific. This wasn't a dog, it was the shadow of a dog. Dr. Evans came in, a woman in her 50s, with kind but perceptive eyes. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She acted. She put on gloves, took a stethoscope. Her hands were fast and sure. Severe dehydration. Emaciation, hypothermia, she stated, listening to its heart. Pulses thready. "Where did you find him?" "At the port," Arthur answered curtly. He couldn't lie to that gaze. "In a ship's hold." Dr. Evans looked up at him. There was no judgment in her eyes, only an understanding of the scale of the disaster. "How long was he in there?" "I don't know. Weeks, maybe." "He's an incredible fighter," she said quietly. "We need to get him on an IV right away and draw blood. We have to fight for him." "What's his name?" The question caught Arthur off guard. A name. He didn't have a name. He was a biological entity, the dog, the boy. Without a name, he was a problem. With a name, he became a person, a responsibility. Arthur looked at the table, at this tortured body that had survived hell, that had clung to life with unbelievable tenacity, that had only gotten lucky because he, Arthur, had heard that quiet rasp. "Lucky," he said. His voice didn't waver. "His name is Lucky." Dr. Evans nodded, as if it were the most fitting name in the world. "All right, Arthur, we'll do everything we can for Lucky. But I have to warn you, this is going to be expensive. Hospitalization, lab work, intensive care." "Do whatever it takes," Arthur interrupted, pulling his wallet from his pocket. He placed his credit card on the counter. "Whatever he needs." In that moment, under the merciless lights of the veterinary clinic, Arthur Finch signed his new protocol. A protocol with no clauses about disposal. A protocol with only one item, written not in ink, but in a sudden, searing wave of compassion. Save him. He was allowed to stay while they placed the catheter. Lucky didn't even flinch when the needle entered his thin, paper-like leg. He just opened his eyes and looked at Arthur. And this time, there was no emptiness in his gaze, no curiosity. There was something new, something like a question. And Arthur, looking back, gave a silent answer. "I'm here. I won't leave you." The clock on the waiting room wall ticked with a merciless, deafening precision. Every second was the blow of a hammer on a taut nerve. Arthur sat on a hard plastic chair, the antithesis of his orderly world. He didn't move. He just stared at the closed door behind which Dr. Evans, his credit card, and the tiny chance of survival he had named Lucky had disappeared. The world had shrunk to this sterile hallway. The sense of antiseptic and anxiety had replaced the familiar salt air of the port. His job, his protocols, his fear of the consequences. It all seemed distant and unimportant. There was only one thought, one question, beating in his mind like a trapped bird. Will he make it? After what felt like a lifetime, the door opened. Dr. Evans looked tired but composed. "He's stable," she said quietly, and Arthur exhaled air he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We've started him on fluids, antibiotics, and we're warming him up. His system, it's in profound shock. He's literally on the brink. The next 24 hours will be critical. We'll be monitoring him every minute." She looked at Arthur with sympathy. "You should go home, Mr. Finch. There's nothing more you can do here. Get some rest. We'll call if there are any changes. Or in the morning with an update." Home. The word sounded strange. His home was a fortress of order, a sanctuary from the world's chaos. But now Arthur himself was the source of chaos. He nodded, unable to say anything, and trudged toward the exit. The drive home was automatic. He didn't remember the route or parking the car, key in the lock. A click. He walked into his apartment and froze on the threshold. Silence. Perfect cleanliness. The books on the shelf were aligned with a ruler. Not a single speck of dust on the coffee table. This was his world, and he felt like a stranger in it. His gaze fell on the chair by the door. His work jacket was lying on it. Dirty, crumpled, smelling of the port, of fear and sickness. It was like a scar on the face of his immaculate apartment. A reminder of what he had done. He walked over and picked it up. The fabric was still damp and cold. He brought it to his face and inhaled. The smell of the hold. The smell of rust and despair. The smell of Lucky. He didn't throw it in the laundry basket. He hung it carefully on the back of the chair, as if it were some kind of artifact, a relic of his insane act. The night was endless. Sleep wouldn't come. Arthur tried to work at his computer, to fill out other reports, to force himself back into his familiar groove. But the letters blurred before his eyes. In the silence of the apartment, he could hear a phantom, shallow breathing. He could see the empty eyes in the beam of his flashlight. He could feel the touch of an ice-cold, dry nose on his fingers. He stood up and went to the window. The city below was alive with its own life, crisscrossed by the lights of cars. The world was the same as it was yesterday. But Arthur Finch was different. The man who never broke the rules had committed a professional crime. The man who avoided all attachments had given his credit card for the life of a stray dog. He didn't recognize himself, and that scared him more than a potential reprimand from his superiors. Morning came with a gray, joyless light. Arthur hadn't slept. He was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee when the phone rang. The sound was so sharp he flinched. He grabbed the receiver. "Mr. Finch." Dr. Evans's voice was level. "Yes," he said, his own throat dry. "This is Dr. Evans from the Hope Clinic. I'm calling about Lucky." A pause. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut. She was going to say he didn't make it, that they did everything they could. He braced for the blow. "He made it through the night," she said. Arthur opened his eyes. The relief was so powerful, his knees buckled, and he leaned against the counter for support. How is he? He's still very weak. His blood work is terrible, as we expected. Severe malnutrition, an infection. But he's a fighter. He's drinking. A little. And his temperature is almost normal. That's a good sign. A very good sign. We've started him on a special therapeutic pâté, a teaspoon at a time. And he's eating. Eating. Such a simple word. But for a creature that had been a hair's breadth from starvation, that word meant life. Can I come see him?" Arthur asked. "Of course. Just for a little while. He needs his rest." Half an hour later, he was back at the clinic. This time, a young nurse led him down a hallway. They entered a quiet room with several glass and metal enclosures. In one of them, on a soft blue bed, lay Lucky. Arthur froze. He'd been cleaned. The matted, filthy fur was gone. Now he was smooth, and it was even more frightening. Every bone, every rib stood out under his skin as if drawn by an anatomist. He was thin to the point of indecency, of pain, but he was clean. Next to him was a bowl of water and a tiny dish with the remains of the pâté. A thin tube ran from his leg to an IV drip. Lucky was sleeping, or dozing. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His single ear twitched in his sleep. He no longer looked like a ghost from the hold. He looked like a very, very sick dog who was being cared for. "You can open it and sit with him for a few minutes," the nurse whispered and left. Arthur carefully slid the glass door open. He didn't touch him. He just crouched down beside the enclosure and watched. He looked at the scar where the second ear should have been, at the skinny legs, at the peaceful rise and fall of his breath. And then Lucky opened his eyes. He looked directly at Arthur, without fear, without panic. There was recognition in his gaze. He slowly, with visible effort, lifted his head. He looked at Arthur, then at his bowl, then back at Arthur. Slowly, so as not to scare him, Arthur reached out and placed his hand on the bedding next to him. Not on him, just near him. A gesture of presence. And then Lucky did something Arthur never expected. He slowly, very slowly, lowered his head and rested his muzzle in Arthur's palm. It wasn't just a touch. It was a decision. And then he gave his finger a faint, barely perceptible lick. Once. In that simple gesture was everything. Gratitude, trust, acknowledgement, all the pain of the past and all the fragile hope for the future. Arthur Finch was frozen. A lump formed in his throat. He, the man of order and protocols, felt a tear roll down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just sat there on the cold floor of the veterinary clinic, holding the head of the dog he had saved in his palm, and understood that this was the first day of the rest of their life together. Arthur left the clinic as if stepping out of another dimension. The morning city, which had seemed gray and hostile only an hour ago, was now filled with detail. He noticed how a sunbeam reflected off a shop window, how a child laughed in the back seat of a passing car, how an elderly couple held hands while walking a small terrier. The world hadn't changed. The filter through which Arthur viewed it had. He got in his car and, for a few minutes, just sat, looking at his hands. On the palm that Lucky had touched, he could still feel a phantom warmth. He started the engine and drove to work. He drove slowly, obeying every rule, as if trying to atone for his great rebellion with this mechanical obedience. The office hummed with the air conditioner and smelled of paper. His world. His desk was a model of order, a stack of documents on the left, computer in the center, 3 perfectly sharpened pencils on the right. He sat in his chair and turned on the computer. On the screen, the unfilled report for the North Star awaited him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He had to write a lie, formulate it clearly, professionally, dispassionately. Scheduled sanitation inspection of holds 1-4 completed. No anomalies, biological threats, or traces of pests detected. Vessel is cleared for fumigation and subsequent loading. Each word was a small stone he placed on the scales, betraying his former self. He typed the text, saved it, sent it. The world didn't explode. No one burst into his office shouting, "Liar!" Nothing happened. But Arthur felt something inside him definitively break and reassemble itself. He was no longer a keeper of order. He was its violator, in the name of something greater. The following day settled into a new, strange ritual. Mornings were for work, where he mechanically performed his duties, feeling like a spy in his own life. And in the evening, At 6 o'clock sharp, he would drive to the clinic. These visits became his oxygen. Lucky's progress was slow but steady. It was a series of small but monumental victories. On the third day, when Arthur entered the recovery room, Lucky lifted his head and watched him. He had been waiting. On the fifth day, when Arthur crouched by his enclosure, the tip of Lucky's tail twitched. Once, then again. It wasn't a full wag, but more like a muscle spasm of a joy his body hadn't yet learned how to express. On the seventh day, they removed the IV. Lucky unsteadily got to his trembling feet and took 2 steps toward the enclosure door when Arthur walked in. He pressed his nose against the glass, leaving a wet print. Arthur started talking to him. At first, it was short, encouraging phrases. "Hey boy, you did good today." Then he started telling him about his day, about the boring reports, the weather, the traffic. He said all this quietly, in an empty room, to a dog in a glass box, and it didn't feel strange. Lucky listened. He would sit with his head tilted, his one ear catching every sound. In his eyes, so recently empty, there was now a bright, intelligent light. One evening, driving back from the clinic, Arthur stopped at a pet store. He went inside with no real purpose. Bright lights, rows of toys, bags of food. He felt as out of place here as on another planet. But he walked the aisles. He picked up a red ball, then a soft blue collar. He didn't know what size he'd need. He put them back, but on his way out he bought one thing, a simple leather leash. He took it home and hung it on a hook by the door, next to his jacket. Now 2 artifacts of his new life hung there. On the 10th day, the call Arthur had been both dreading and expecting came. It was his boss, Mr. Henderson. "Finch, good afternoon. Calling about your report on the North Star." Arthur's heart sank. This was it, the end. "Yes, sir," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just wanted to double-check. Everything was really clean in there? No issues? You know how it is with arrivals from Panama. They can be full of surprises." "No, sir. Everything was in perfect order. I checked it personally." "Every corner," Arthur said. The lie came easier this time. It horrified him. "Excellent," Henderson said. "I thought as much. You're our most reliable inspector, Finch. Keep up the good work." He hung up. Arthur sat holding the phone. The praise from his boss felt like a slap in the face. On the 14th day, Dr. Evans met him in the reception area with a smile. "I have news for you, Arthur. I think our fighter is ready to be discharged." Arthur froze. He had been so focused on Lucky's survival that he hadn't thought about what came next. He's gained almost 5 pounds. He's eating like a champion. The infection is gone. His IV wounds have healed. He doesn't need to be in a hospital anymore. He needs a home. A home. Arthur looked at Dr. Evans, then at his hands, then back at her. "My place. It's not set up for a dog," he mumbled. It was the first panicked thought. His sterile apartment. His perfect order. Dr. Evans looked at him with gentle understanding. "I can help find him a good shelter. Or a temporary foster home. Given his history, he deserves the very best. But I have to be honest, Arthur. He's bonded with you. You're his person. For a dog this traumatized, changing his environment and caregiver again would be a huge stress." She left him alone with that thought. He walked to Lucky's room. He was already sitting by the door of his enclosure, and at the sight of Arthur, his tail started wagging. For real this time, his whole back end wiggled with joy. He jumped up, putting his front paws on the glass. He was still thin, but he was full of life, energy, hope. Arthur opened the enclosure. Lucky immediately pressed against his knees, sniffing his pants, his hands, leaving wet nose prints. He looked up at Arthur, and his whole being asked a single, silent question. "Well, are we getting out of here?" And Arthur knew. He couldn't give him up. He couldn't go back to his empty, silent apartment knowing that Lucky was sitting in a cage at a shelter, waiting for him. To betray him now, after everything they'd been through, would be worse than being called into his boss's office. It would be a betrayal of himself. He didn't drive home from the clinic. He drove to that same pet store. This time, he walked the aisles with purpose. He bought 2 metal bowls, one for water, one for food. He bought a large bag of the therapeutic food Dr. Evans had recommended. He bought that same blue collar, estimating the size by eye. And he bought a large, soft, dark gray dog bed. When he got home, he began dismantling his order without a second thought. He moved the coffee table, clearing a space by the sofa. He put the bed there. He set the bowls in the kitchen on a special mat he'd also bought. The sound of water filling a bowl in his quiet apartment was the strangest and most perfect sound in the world. He moved the expensive books from the bottom shelf to the top. He tucked away the computer cables. When he was done, he looked around his apartment. It was no longer a sterile fortress. It had become a home, a little awkward, unprepared, but a home. He took his old work jacket from the chair. He took the new leash from the hook. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the television. And for the first time in a long, long time, he liked the man looking back at him. Arthur Finch left his apartment and closed the door behind him. He was driving to the clinic. He was going to get his dog. The discharge process was ridiculously mundane. Paperwork, signatures, a bill with a number that would have made the old Arthur Finch break out in a cold sweat. But now he looked at it as the price of a ticket to a new life. His own, not just the dog's. Dr. Evans handed him a bag of medications and a detailed feeding schedule. Her gaze was warm and a little sad, like someone letting something precious go out into the world. "Good luck, Arthur, to both of you," she said. Then a nurse brought Lucky out. He was wearing the new blue collar. It looked defiantly bright against his thin neck, like a flag of victory. Lucky didn't look back at his enclosure. He walked, limping slightly but with his head held high, his one ear pointed forward like a radar dish. He walked straight to Arthur. Arthur crouched down and clipped on the leash. The click of the plastic carabiner sounded louder than a gunshot in the quiet clinic. It was the sound of an official, irreversible connection. They were bound now. The walk to the exit was their first journey together. Lucky walked beside him, not pulling on the leash as if he'd been doing it his whole life. He trusted the man at the other end. When the automatic doors slid open, letting in a gust of fresh evening air, Lucky froze for a second. He lifted his head and drank in the scents of the world. Not rust and machine oil, but damp earth after a recent rain, exhaust fumes, fallen leaves, and something else, unfamiliar and exciting. It was the smell of freedom. In the car, Lucky hopped onto the passenger seat himself. He was no longer a limp bundle. He sat up, looking out the windshield. The passing lights, houses, trees. He absorbed it all with a ravenous, almost childlike curiosity. Arthur drove carefully, as if he were transporting not a dog, but a fragile piece of hope. He could feel Lucky's eyes on him, a look full of expectation. Key in the lock. A click. Arthur opened the door and stepped aside, letting Lucky go first. Welcome home, boy. For Arthur, it was his apartment, strangely transformed. For Lucky, it was a new universe. He stopped on the threshold, his body tense. Slowly, very slowly, he stepped inside, and the exploration began. His nose became his guide. He sniffed the leg of a chair, then the corner of the rug. He walked into the living room and froze in front of the big gray bed. He nudged it with his nose, snorted. He circled it once, then again. Then, with an almost human hesitation, he placed one paw on it, then the other, and finally he collapsed onto it. He didn't just lie down, he collapsed, his entire weary body, and let out a long, deep, rattling sigh. The sigh of a creature that had been running its whole life and had finally stopped. Arthur stood, afraid to move. He watched as Lucky, without getting up, turned his head and found the kitchen with his eyes. The bowls were there. Lucky looked at the bowls, then at Arthur. It was a silent but perfectly clear question. Arthur walked to the kitchen, his steps feeling thunderous. He filled one bowl with fresh water and poured a scoop of therapeutic food into the other. The sound of the dry kibble hitting the metal made Lucky's ear twitch. He got up, more steadily this time, and followed Arthur on stiff legs. He went to the bowls. First, he drank for a long time, lapping loudly. Then he put his nose in the food bowl and began to eat. Not greedily, not in a rush, but deliberately, with dignity. Arthur sat down on the floor, leaning his back against a kitchen cabinet, and just watched. He watched his dog eat in his home. And in that moment, all the anxiety, all the fear of the past 2 weeks finally dissolved. All that was left was a quiet, all-encompassing rightness. The chaos he had brought into his home turned out to be the most comforting, most orderly feeling in the world. The first night was a test. Arthur got into his bed but couldn't sleep. He listened for every little sound. Lucky was sleeping on his bed in the living room. At first, he tossed and turned, sighing, then fell quiet. Arthur got up and tiptoed to the doorway. In the moonlight streaming through the window, he saw Lucky sleeping, his legs sprawled out. His side rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Sometimes, in his sleep, his legs would twitch and he would let out a soft whimper. He was running. Even in his sleep, he was still running somewhere. Arthur watched him, his heart aching with tenderness. He went back to bed and finally fell asleep. He wasn't woken by his alarm clock. He was woken by a wet, cold nose nudging his cheek. Arthur opened his eyes. Lucky was standing over him, his tail wagging cautiously. There wasn't a trace of past horror in his gaze. Only a clear, morning, demanding question. "Well, boss, time for a walk?" Their new life was made of moments like these. Of their first walk in the park, where Lucky, at first scared of the rustling leaves, was chasing a butterfly with delight 5 minutes later. Of how he learned to fetch the red ball Arthur had finally bought him. Of how he could lie for hours at Arthur's feet while he worked at the computer, resting his head on Arthur's slipper. The apartment was no longer quiet. It was filled with sounds, the click of claws on the laminate floor, the quiet crunch of kibble, the contented snores of a sleeping dog. Arthur found himself talking to him constantly. And Lucky would answer with a tilt of his head, a wag of his tail, a knowing look. One Saturday morning, several months later, Arthur was sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. Outside, it was an ordinary day. But for Arthur, everything was extraordinary. On the rug, in a patch of sunlight, Lucky was sleeping. He no longer looked like a skeleton. His coat had grown in, thick and shiny. The scars on his body and his torn ear would always be with him, reminders of his past. But now, they were the scars of a survivor. Lucky was sleeping deeply and peacefully. He no longer ran in his sleep. He was home. Arthur looked at him, then at his perfectly ordered bookshelf, at the empty coffee table. His old world of order now seemed like a faded, two-dimensional photograph. He thought he had been saving a dog from the darkness of a cargo hold. But now, looking at this peacefully sleeping creature, he understood with absolute clarity that it had been the other way around. It was Lucky who had pulled him from his own sterile, battened-down hold of loneliness. He hadn't destroyed Arthur's world. He had given it a heart. Arthur smiled. It was the quiet, peaceful smile of a man who had finally found his harbor.